She told me, "I can't trust you." I whispered, "Then let me earn it slowly." I first noticed her in the way she moved across the room, not in a rush, not in a performance, just presence, the kind that presses against you without touching. I was 23, and I thought I knew desire. Then she laughed, low and unexpected, and the world narrowed to the curve of her shoulder, the soft tilt of her chin. She didn't look at me at first. She rarely did. But when she finally did, I felt it before I even understood it. The careful measuring of someone used to keeping distance, the tiniest flinch when eyes linger too long. And I didn't look away. I couldn't. Her name is Marianne. Mid-40s, graceful, the kind of beauty that carries both confidence and the faint trace of an apology you don't quite hear. She wore a scarf loosely draped around her neck, burgundy, like the hush of a slow fire, and a sweater soft enough that I imagined running my fingers over it, though I didn't. Not yet. I'm Eli, 23, inexperienced in the ways the world can fold and hold you. I have this habit of noticing everything. The way her hands curl around a coffee cup, the barely there tremor when someone else brushes past her. Today, she's brushing past me, close enough that the heat from her elbow presses into mine. A brush so light, I almost wonder if it was on purpose. "Eli," she says, voice low measured. A name like a question, like a promise she isn't ready to keep. Her eyes, deep brown with flecks of gold, meet mine for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. I see the pause in her breathing. I see the small tightening in her jaw. We're standing in the corner of the cafe where the light falls like liquid through the blinds, painting stripes over the wooden table. There's silence except for the coffee machine hissing in the background, except for the subtle thump of my own pulse, which I swear she can feel. I reach, almost instinctively, just far enough to let my fingers brush hers. As she sets her cup down, she flinches, but not fully. It's like a secret invitation and a warning at once. My thumb hovers over the back of her hand, and I don't move it. Not yet. I wait, because this small electric pause is what she gives freely, however briefly. "You have a lot to prove," she says softly, eyes not leaving mine. Her voice carries both caution and challenge. I swallow, and it comes out as a whisper, almost drowned by the hiss of steam. "Then let me earn it slowly." She doesn't smile. Not really. Not yet. But her shoulders shift, relax, almost imperceptibly, and the air between us thickens. I can smell her perfume now, something warm, faintly floral, with a whisper of smoke. It makes me dizzy, and I'm 23, and I'm here, and she's here, and the rest of the world doesn't exist. A chair scrapes sharply in the background, and she jerks slightly, as though someone might have been watching us, though no one is. Her gaze flicks to the cafe entrance, then back to me, tension coiling along her spine like a spring. I don't break eye contact. She doesn't either. Her hand twitches, brushing against the table, but she doesn't move away. The moment stretches, suspended, charged with something neither of us can name yet. And then, the door swings open, letting in a gust of cold air, and someone calls her name. Her head snaps toward it, her body tensing. My hand is still hovering, useless, frozen in midair, and just like that, the fragile spell shatters. Yet even as she turns, even as she walks toward the interruption, she throws me a look over her shoulder, brief, impossible to read. A question? A warning? An invitation? I don't know, but I know I'm already in too deep. I didn't see her for 2 days. The cafe emptied, the sunlight slanting differently through the blinds, but all I could think about was the way her fingers brushed against mine. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that almost smile, that tension in her shoulders, the faint crease of worry at the corner of her mouth. When she returned, it was late afternoon. She wore a coat that hung loosely, as if trying to contain herself without entirely succeeding. Her eyes scanned the room, and then, slowly, they found me. There was something in her gaze that wasn't quite accusation, wasn't quite longing either. Just wary gravity. "Eli," she said, voice lower than before, almost shy. A laugh, but brittle. "You've been here waiting?" I shrugged, pretending casual. My stomach twisted, betraying me. "Not waiting. Just reading." I waved vaguely at the stack of books beside me, hoping she'd believe it. She glanced at them, but didn't comment. Instead, she sat across from me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her. She crossed one leg over the other, and the movement brought her just a fraction nearer. My shoulder brushed hers. She didn't flinch. Not immediately. Not entirely. I noticed everything about her. The tiny scar along her wrist, faded but still visible. The way her hair tumbled across one shoulder, catching the light. The subtle tension in her jaw. The way her thumb tapped lightly against the table as if to remind herself she was in control. You ever regret things? I asked suddenly, a threadbare attempt at normal conversation. Her eyes flicked up, sharp. Sometimes, she said, voice tight, then softer, almost a whisper. But I've learned to live with them. I didn't press, though the silence was thick with questions. I sensed the loneliness beneath her composure, the careful walls built over years of disappointment, of choices she never stopped second-guessing. She had been burned before, and it showed in the cautious way she measured my presence, the hesitance in leaning too close. And yet, she lingered, close enough that when she laughed, her breath brushed my cheek, close enough that the faint scent of her, something warm, faintly floral, maybe cinnamon, lingered in the air around me long after she shifted, close enough that worry at the corner of her mouth. When she returned, it was late afternoon. She wore a coat that hung loosely, as if trying to contain herself without entirely succeeding. Her eyes scanned the room, and then, slowly, they found me. There was something in her gaze that wasn't quite accusation, wasn't quite longing either. Just wary gravity. Eli, she said, voice lower than before, almost shy. A laugh, but brittle. You've been here waiting? I shrugged, pretending casual. My stomach twisted, betraying me. Not waiting. Just reading. I waved vaguely at the stack of books beside me, hoping she'd believe it. She glanced at them, but didn't comment. Instead, she sat across from me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her. She crossed one leg over the other, and the movement brought her just a fraction nearer. My shoulder brushed hers. She didn't flinch. Not immediately. Not entirely. I noticed everything about her. The tiny scar along her wrist, faded but still visible. The way her hair tumbled across one shoulder, catching the light. The subtle tension in her jaw. The way her thumb tapped lightly against the table as if to remind herself she was in control. Do you ever regret things? I asked suddenly, a threadbare attempt at normal conversation. Her eyes flicked up, sharp. Sometimes, she said, voice tight, then softer, almost a whisper. But I've learned to live with them. I didn't press, though the silence was thick with questions. I sensed the loneliness beneath her composure, the careful walls built over years of disappointment, of choices she never stopped second-guessing. She had been burned before, and it showed in the cautious way she measured my presence, the hesitance in leaning too close. And yet, she lingered, close enough that when she laughed, her breath brushed my cheek, close enough that the faint scent of her, something warm, faintly floral, maybe cinnamon, lingered in the air around me long after she shifted, close enough that when she laughed, her breath brushed my cheek, close enough that the faint scent of her, something warm, faintly floral, maybe cinnamon, lingered in the air around me long after she shifted, close enough that my hand twitched, itching to touch the curve of her wrist. You're too observant, she said finally, her tone teasing, almost dangerous. But her shoulder brushed mine again, deliberately, and my pulse jumped. Maybe, I whispered, or maybe I just noticed things worth noticing. Her eyes held mine longer this time. Something unspoken passed between us. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. The weight of the gap between us, the years, the caution, the social rules whispered in the background, hung heavily, yet there was no fear in that gaze. Just interest, desire wrapped in restraint. She reached, almost carelessly, to adjust a book I'd stacked too high. Our hands collided, held mine, wide and startled, and I could see the sharp edges of fear and restraint. I shouldn't, she whispered. I know, I said. And still, I didn't move. The room seemed to shrink around us. Papers, coffee mugs, the hum of fluorescent lights. Everything reduced to the tiny space between us. Every brush of her sleeve, every shift of her weight, was amplified. Every inhale she drew, I felt in my chest. A knock at the door startled us both. She jerked back slightly, letting the moment shatter. I wanted to curse the interruption, to push the world away. Instead, we shared a look, brief, electric, heavy with words neither of us dared say. Then she stepped closer again, and our hands brushed, not by accident this time. My fingers found hers, lightly, almost reverently, and she didn't pull away. Her shoulder pressed against mine, a whisper of warmth. And I realized, with dizzying clarity, that we were closer than ever, closer than either of us wanted to admit, yet neither willing to move back. The door remained closed. The world remained outside. And for a heartbeat, just a heartbeat, we were all that existed. The rain began softly at first, then harder, hammering against the window pane as if urging us into confession. We were alone in her apartment, the dim light casting shadows across the room, making everything feel intimate, immediate. She sat on the edge of the couch, knees drawn close, and I stood just behind her, close enough to feel her warmth, close enough to want more. "Eli," she murmured, voice unsteady, almost caught in the storm of her own thoughts. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her hair back from her face. I reached out before thinking, brushing a stray strand behind her ear. She shivered, not away, just a subtle tremor that left my fingers tingling. "I can't," she began, hesitating. Then, almost too softly to hear, "I shouldn't feel this way." I leaned closer, my voice dropping low near her ear. "Neither should I admitted. But I do. Every moment, every glance, every brush of your hand." My words faltered. I swallowed. "It's too much to ignore." She inhaled sharply, and I felt her lean back just enough to catch her breath, but not enough to move away. My heart pounded in a rhythm that matched the storm outside. Every inch of proximity was electric, every breath she took brushing against my own. I wanted to close the distance, to let her feel what I felt. But something held me back, the invisible thread of caution she had always maintained. Her eyes, wide and shimmering with unshed emotion, searched mine. "People, they wouldn't understand," she whispered. "The age, the risk." "I don't care," I interrupted, almost harshly, though my hand lingered lightly on her shoulder. "I only care about this," I said, motioning vaguely between us, the tension thick and undeniable. She swallowed, jaw tight, and then her fingers twitched against mine, a small, hesitant claim. My chest tightened. I wanted to close the last gap, to touch her fully, to show her, without words, the obsession, the longing, the care that had been building for months. Her lips parted slightly, a breath, a warning, an invitation all at once. I could feel the heat radiating from her, the subtle tremor of her body against mine. My fingers brushed along her arm, tracing the curve to her wrist. Every inch of her was magnetic, pulling me closer, daring me to ignore reason. She started, then stopped, trembling. Her gaze dropped to my lips, then back up, uncertain, vulnerable, defiant. The storm outside was deafening now, but it was nothing compared to the quiet explosion between us. I could lean closer. I could close the gap. And then, a sudden buzz of her phone broke the tension. She startled, stepping back slightly, hands fumbling. My fingers hovered, barely grazing hers, as the fragile spell shattered for a heartbeat. But the moment had changed us. Something unspoken had shifted. I could feel it. She could feel it. We were inches apart, hearts hammering, breaths mingling, teetering on the edge. And then she whispered, barely audible over the rain. "Eli, if we..." The words hung in the air. The next move, the next word, the next touch, would cross a line neither of us could take back. The next morning, sunlight slanting through the blinds, I found her sitting at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee like it might steady her. The storm from last night had passed, but the tension between us hadn't. "I need to tell you something," she said, voice low but firm. Her eyes didn't leave mine, but they weren't soft. They were wary, sharp, dangerous. I froze. My pulse spiked, each beat hammering against my ribs. She had never started like this. I know you've been staying later at the office," she began. "And last night, I overheard something." She looked down, then back at me. "A colleague mentioned how close we've been. People are talking." My stomach dropped. Not because of the gossip itself. I could handle whispers, but because the weight of her gaze pressed down on me, intimate and judging at once. She sipped her coffee, and I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. A warning? A confession? She caught my eye as her hand brushed the rim of the mug, and I could almost feel the electricity in that tiny movement. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked softly, and the vulnerability in her tone pulled at something raw inside me. I, I didn't want to scare you, I said, voice low. My hand itched to reach across the table, to touch her, to reassure her that nothing else mattered. Her lips parted slightly, just enough for me to catch the faintest breath of her, warm and lingering. She leaned forward as if to close the space between us, then caught herself, leaning back again. The motion was almost painful, magnetic and torturous at the same time. I've been careful, she whispered. I didn't want anyone else involved. I didn't want it to be reckless. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Reckless. That was exactly how it felt. Dangerous, thrilling, irresistible. My chest tightened. I wanted to tell her that nothing else mattered, that all the rules outside that kitchen didn't exist when it was just us. Instead, I let my hand hover near hers on the table. A breath, a pause. She noticed it. Her eyes widened, just slightly, a shiver running along her spine that I could almost see. She moved her mug a fraction, brushing her arm against mine, close enough that I felt the heat radiating off her. I don't want to lose control, she admitted, voice barely audible. Her shoulder brushed mine again, just enough to make me shiver in return. I leaned in, slow, deliberate, letting the air between us thicken. Then let's not, I murmured, almost against her ear. Let's take it one step at a time. But we're already here, Marianne. We can't go back. Her breath hitched, and I caught the tiniest twitch of her hand, trembling as if she wanted to reach for mine, but wasn't sure she could. The room held its breath. So did we. And in that silence, in the brush of shoulders, and the heat of shared air, I knew we were crossing a line we couldn't cross. Then she made her choice, a subtle, dangerous tilt of her head closer, a silent invitation I could neither resist nor fully claim. And I knew, finally, that nothing would ever be the same. The apartment was quiet again, evening shadows stretching long across the floor, but the air between us felt alive, charged, impossible to ignore. Marianne stood near the window, rain still streaking the glass outside, and I was just behind her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off her back. Every heartbeat between us was loud, every inhale drawn sharp and shallow. I can't. I shouldn't, she whispered, and I could hear the tremor in her voice. She turned slightly, just enough to meet my eyes, and the world shrank to the space between us. Why? I asked softly, barely more than a breath. My hand hovered near hers, trembling slightly, not wanting to force, only to bridge the gap she had built around herself for decades. She bit her lip, eyes flicking down, then back up, sharp and raw. Because people talk. Because I've lived long enough to know the consequences. Because, she hesitated, voice faltering, I'm scared. I stepped closer, slow, careful. The scent of her, warm, faintly floral, hit me full in the chest. My fingers brushed hers, tentative, testing. She didn't pull away. She leaned ever so slightly into my touch, the slightest pressure, as if weighing the risk of letting herself fall. Then we decide, I whispered, voice low, almost a rasp, if we want this or not. Right here, right now. Her eyes searched mine, vulnerable and defiant at once. And I understood, this wasn't just desire. It was trust. It was fear. It was everything she had guarded for so long, finally pressed against me in a fragile, trembling offering. Her hand found mine fully, the fit perfect, instinctual. I leaned in just slightly, careful of the space, careful not to rush what was so fragile and so dangerous. Our breath mingled, hot and shallow, the silence around us impossibly thick. I don't want to lose this, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. The words trembled in the room, as fragile and raw as the distance we had just crossed. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, warm and forgiving, painting the room in pale gold. Marianne sat on the couch, her knees tucked under her, a blanket loosely draped over her shoulders. I settled beside her, careful not to rush, letting the quiet stretch between us feel full, complete. She glanced at me, and for the first time, there was no hesitation, no flicker of fear. Just recognition of what had passed, what had shifted, what we had chosen. Morning, she whispered, a small, vulnerable smile tugging at her lips. Morning, I replied softly, and my fingers found hers naturally, weaving together. The touch was light, tentative, yet it carried everything we hadn't said, The trust, the desire, the patience, the surrender. She leaned against me, letting the weight of her body settle gently against mine. I could feel the warmth of her shoulder, the slow rhythm of her breathing, and I realized that every moment leading up to this, the hesitation, the near misses, the fear, had been worth it. Every second had led to this quiet closeness, this small, perfect human moment. You know, she murmured, tracing idle patterns on the back of my hand. I was scared of how much I wanted this, of how much her voice faltered, and I gently pressed my thumb against hers, grounding her without words. Me too, I admitted. But we're here, and it feels right. Her head tilted, resting lightly against my shoulder, and I leaned in, brushing my lips softly against her hairline. She sighed, a long, soft exhale, and I felt the tension leave her, feel her finally allow herself to belong, just a little, to this connection we had fought to let exist. We sat like that for a while, words unnecessary, simply sharing warmth and space. Her hand, curled around mine, thumb brushing slowly back and forth. The age gap, the whispers, the careful self-restraints, they no longer mattered. What mattered was this. Here, now together. She tilted her head up to meet my gaze. I didn't think. I could feel this, she said, voice soft, vulnerable, yet steady. You can, I said. We can, and we will. Her smile widened, genuine, unguarded, and I felt my chest lift with relief and joy. Slowly, I leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, careful, tender. She closed her eyes and rested her cheek against mine, and it felt like a promise without words. Trust, patience, love. The world outside could wait. Outside didn't matter. We had found each other, through the pauses, the near misses, the uncertainty. And now, finally, we are together. She shifted slightly, wrapping an arm around my waist, drawing me closer. I tightened my hold around her shoulders. We breathed in sync, a quiet celebration of what had been built so carefully and what could now exist fully. No rush, no fear, just the steady, human rhythm of two people who had found each other. And as the sunlight spilled across the floor, it was impossible to imagine being anywhere else or anyone else, but here, together. You won't, I said, and I meant it. My other hand hovered near her shoulder, uncertain, reverent, before it rested gently, letting her feel the promise of steadiness, of patience, of surrender. Her head tilted, almost imperceptibly, closer, and I felt it. The shift, the surrender, the acknowledgement that we were choosing each other, despite the fear, despite the risk. The world outside stopped matching. The age gap, the whispered judgments, the careful self-restraints, they didn't matter. Not at that moment. We didn't speak, couldn't speak. Words were unnecessary. The closeness, the trembling, the shared heartbeat was enough. I felt her lean slightly into me, just enough that the weight of her trust settled against my chest. And in that small, human gesture, everything became clear. We were no longer just drawn to each other. We were tethered, undeniably, irrevocably. And for the first time, I knew she understood me, just as I understood her. The fear was still there, yes, lingering like the hum of electricity in the air. But beneath it, something stronger, unshakable. We had chosen, together. The line had been crossed, and neither of us would ever step back. Engagement questions for YouTube. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next? Which character's perspective did you connect with most? Would you like more slow burn romances like this, or something with unexpected twists?